Mind broadcast with your hosts, Bishop C. Guy Robinson and Dr. Jonathan Shepard, where we explore faith and mental health perspectives on current affairs. Let's get into today's discussion with the Spirit in Mind.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Spirit in Mind, where, as you just heard, we discuss current affairs with faith and mental health perspectives. I'm Bishop Guy Robinson, and I am honored to be with you today. And good day to you, Dr. Shepard.
Hey, Bishop, how are you?
I'm doing well, doing well. How's your week been?
It's been a week of weeks, as they say, but I'm good. I'm here and glad to be alive. How has your week been?
A week of weeks says it well. It's been busy, but we hope productive. Believe it's productive and effective. There is a difference. Yes, sir. I am excited about this opportunity, as always, to share with our Spirit in Mind family. Good evening. And we see persons starting to come in, and that's always a good thing for us, because this is all about relationship and dialogue, questions and responses, and adding to the conversation. And as always, we're excited about our connection and how our relationship as Spirit in Mind hosts and family continues to grow and expand. And so we encourage you to tell someone that Spirit in Mind is on, that it's time for Spirit in Mind. And of course, Dr. Shepard will, in addition to whatever greetings he feels led to give, will also tell us about the power of connection and how we can stay connected in an even greater way.
Absolutely. So again, good evening to everyone who is out there, and thank you for going ahead and commenting and let us know that you are watching. And I'm going to be interacting with you as we go throughout, and we have some exciting news that is on the horizon for Spirit in Mind broadcast, and we just want to share a little bit of that with you. As we do, I want to just greet the people: Charlotte Green, Cynthia Hackshaw, and Juanita Henderson, and Stacy Burston Bynum, Sandra McCrae, Jacqueline Shaw, and there's other people who are coming on in. So thank you for being a part. And we have exciting news as we are ready to launch our podcast. So being an official podcast. I was gonna say podcaster, but I guess that is the term, podcaster. And we're anxiously awaiting that. You'll be hearing more about that, but it looks like our date will be at the beginning of May when we'll be ready to release the podcast. So please, you'll be hearing so much about that as it is coming up. And you'll see all the advertisements and flyers, but wanted to let you know about that. So stay in tune with us. Please reach out to us. There's so many different avenues. We're anxiously waiting the podcast to be another way, but you can email us now, today, if you wish. You can go to my website or to my email address. Let us know how you are doing. Let us know if there's some way in which we can assist you. Being in my role as a physician, I'm able to direct those who are in need of direct care services for those who are mentally ill or have mental health disorders. And you reach out to my website or my email address, the Gmail account, and my office number. And it's always so good to get phone calls from people who've been watching on social media. So please do that. You can hit me up on Facebook, YouTube, or Instagram or Twitter. That's how you can reach out to me. And with my co-host, who is the visionary, the one who started this broadcast, the Bishop C. Guy Robinson, please reach out to him. And you can see right there the various handles that he has, Gmail account, office number. Follow him on Instagram, Twitter, and you'll be blessed. You can even meet him as he is the senior pastor of the Tabernacle of the Lord. And you can go there and even hear some of his dynamic sermons. pick up even some of the books that he has written. So there's so much that Bishop Robinson has to offer, and we just look forward to sharing with you on these various platforms. And yes, Bishop, we are just about ready for the podcast.
I'm excited about it and looking forward to it, and can't wait until we can even share even more details with our Spirit and Mind family, present and family that is to come. And so we look forward to all of these ways to stay in touch. I believe it's important. There's so much going on in the world today, and we're going to be talking about triggers and so many areas of tension and concern that will perhaps provoke feelings of anxiety. And even as it is a time we believe as believers of great expectation, it's also a season with many concerns. And as we'll talk about again more today, trauma triggers and on the international level, and there's several international crises, certainly, and domestic concerns and societal unrest in various expressions, and medical concerns, as we're still dealing with variants and those kinds of things, and other areas of concern, and the economic impact. And all of these things can affect our peace of mind, if you will, what the Bible calls our peace of mind. And so I just believe that God has raised us up intentionally for this to help make some kind of contribution to our overall wellness, so that we can flourish and experience what the World Health Organization calls not just the absence of illness, but the presence of wellness. And so we certainly hope that can be part of our contribution to that pursuit, that we flourish. Or as the Bible says, I would above all things that you would prosper, not just scratch and survive, but thrive and prosper and be in good health, not just exist, but live the Zoe, the God kind of life that he intended for us to live. And so that's our goal, to contribute towards that vision, towards that end, through spirit and mind. And so we've been talking about it, just all has kind of flowed together. Dr. Shepherd will give us a recap and kind of get us all down the runway and into the air a little bit. But we've been talking about the power of forgiveness. We were talking about this, or have been talking about this for some time. And then some other events unfolded on social media trends and events in celebrity culture that already fit into and under this umbrella of what we've already been discussing, because that's the power of it, is that we're just talking about what it means to be human and to go through these various psychosocial stages of experiencing life. And as we go through them, different events happen that kind of fit into what we're already discussing. We've been talking about forgiveness, and because we are relational beings, bonding and offense are part of our experience, and hopefully reconciliation. What does reconciliation look like? Does reconciliation mean reinstatement? Not necessarily. And so we've been discussing those kind of things, and that led us to talk a little bit about trauma triggers. And so, Dr. Shepherd, if you will, I just did the sitting in the airplane, giving out the basics directions, but take us down the runway and into the air, if you would.
Absolutely. So we are getting ready. Let's say, buckle your seatbelts and make sure everything is in place. Tray tables up as we get ready to take off here. Last week we talked, focused in on some trauma triggers. I dealt with the definition of what a trauma trigger is as a psychological stimulus that prompts an involuntary recall of a previous traumatic experience. So I'll say it again. A trigger is a psychological stimulus. All right. A stimulus, thank you, that prompts an involuntary recall of a previous traumatic experience. So that's what a trauma trigger is. And so you might say, yeah, what might those be, Dr. Shepherd? Well, for some people, they may be memories. These are internal triggers that happen within your body, memories, feelings, emotions, or bodily sensations. And how is that related to forgiveness? Because sometimes we are unable to forgive because of these triggers. We can't get over the fact that someone did something to us that hurt us, maybe even abused, maybe even took someone's life. And when you see that person, even smell, that's such a powerful sense. When you get around that person, it's an internal trigger. And you may wonder, being a bystander, like, what's wrong with that person? It was a trigger, it was a psychological stimulus. It was nothing necessarily that could be seen, but prompted this involuntary recall of that traumatic experience. And when that happens, you may see anger, anxiety, the feeling of being abandoned, loneliness, vulnerability, frustration, even sadness. And in your physical body, you may feel pain or muscle tension. So these are some of the things that can occur when you are experiencing a traumatic trigger. And so that is just so important to understand that when a person has been triggered, you may not know what he or she is referring to. And that's why I believe that we see instances where people are really struggling back and forth on that ability to be able to say, I'm letting this go. I'm able to move forward. I'm not able to move forward. I'm stuck, or I want to get unstuck, but I can't do it because these triggers are present there. I have a graphic, Bishop, if I may. I want to go a little further here. I have a graphic here, and I'm just ready to now take off, and I'm sure Bishop will help us to begin to stabilize and to coast some. But I have a graphic here, so I'm using a cartoon character here, just for a little humor, but also it demonstrates and gets the point across. So I'm talking about triggers, all right? And if you look at the very top, hopefully y'all are looking at this and see this. And so at the very top is a stimulus. And so Homer Simpson, that is the cartoon character there, he has a fever on the one on the left. And on the right, he gets a chill, so like almost like frostbite. So that's the stimulus. And so when a fever comes, and that may be due to whatever the cause is, he may be overheated, he might be sick, he might have an infection, whatever it might be, it causes his temperature to rise. Now, as you see further to the left, there's a response, right? Because he feels sick. He is not feeling well. His temperature is rising. And what happens is in the brain, and this is really true, what happens to you when you have a fever, it sends a signal to your brain. And I'm not going to get into which part of the brain, just know it goes to your brain, okay? And when that happens, the brain then regulates the body temperature so that it can now come down, and then your response should be the one on the right. And so it's a negative feedback loop because you don't want to remain in something that is going to keep your temperature up high. If you have a high temperature, you want to have something that's going to oppose it so it can bring your down. All right. So that's why it's a negative as opposed to a positive feedback loop. Positive feedback loops is when things continue to fuel the current stimulus, continue to fuel the current thing that you want to have occur in your body. Now I'm speaking vaguely because I'm trying to keep it very generic as possible. So in this case, when you look at there, there's a change, and there's four components, and then I'm going to be done. Okay. Still want you to look at the graphic. All right, you're there. Please, I see you are commenting. Thank you, Minister Donna. Yes, internal triggers. Yes. But there are four things that are key here. There's a change, and that the change was the fever, right? Or if you want to start on the right, it could have been frostbite. All right, that could be the change. But change is anything that requires a reaction. It could be the change in temperature, pressure, or even the chemical composition inside or surrounding the cell. All right. The cell in this case would be Homer, because as humans, we're made of several cells. So that's number one, is there's a change. Then number two, there is the receptor. So once the change occurs, it's the receptor's job to detect the change and alert the proper control center to counteract it, returning the cell of the person and the overall system to a balanced state. So what you see right there on the left is the change that has occurred. Then you see the receptor. The receptor is then headed over to the brain. All right. And it's where the receptor is in the brain. The brain still remains the control center, which is the number three part. So the receptor gets activated, sends a signal to the control center in the brain, and that brain then receives the impulses from the remote receptors, and then it commands the effector to counteract the change in the environment. Wow. So when you have a fever, I'm just taking time to break it down, and you're going to see where I'm going with this. You have the fever, that's the change. You have the receptor. And so the receptor doesn't necessarily have to be in the brain. It can be anywhere on your body. All right. But it sends a signal to the brain. The receptor cannot make the change. That's important. It's the control center to make the change. But there's an issue with the receptor, then the control center can't get the right impulse. I'm sure Bishop's going to tear that apart. But you got to make sure your receptors are working in order for it to get the right signal to the control center. Now, the control center's job is not done, because now it has to send the impulse back to the effector, EFFECTOR. And this is what acts on the impulses from a specific command center, counteracting the change and returning the internal and external environment back to the balanced state. So these are the four elements of what we call homeostasis. Now, Dr. Shepard, you might say, well, what does this have to do with traumatic triggers? Well, it has a lot to do with traumatic triggers, actually. Because what happens in trauma is that you heard me talking about psychological stimulus. What happens is in trauma, one of those receptors either is one or two things. It either gets hypersensitized or it gets deactivated. I'll say it again. When people are traumatized, they either become real hypersensitive to anything that even remotely sounds like the previous traumatic experience. Case in point, let a car backfire. And I've seen where people literally will run underneath a table or a desk or go hide because it reminds them of gunshots that they were a part of, whether it be in their neighborhood or in war or whatever it might be. And so now that receptor that they once was working normally before the traumatic experience is now hypersensitive. So anything that reminds me of that thing that threatened my life just sends me over the edge. Or, and just as equally important, you've seen where some people get numb to the pain or numb to the traumatic pain. So I've seen where people have been abused. Some people have been, whether it be physical abuse or verbal abuse or even sexual abuse. And those whose receptors may be working, quote unquote, normal or appropriately, because I don't like to use that word normal, but working appropriately, you might look at them and say, well, how come he or she allows this person to continue to do this to me or to that person? Well, the answer is their receptors may not be working, desensitized. And you can have a traumatic experience occur. And just one time, believe it or not, Bishop, one traumatic experience can just desensitize you for an extended period of time, just wipe you all the way out. And this really relates to how there are so many people who struggle with getting their receptors back in place so that they can be able to A, move on, and B, be able to forgive. I would submit to you, it's hard or difficult. Nothing's impossible, but it'd be very difficult to forgive when you're out of balance, when you're out of homeostasis. That is the medical term. We want to talk about this today because we want to help people recognize that these traumatic triggers, yes, you might just say, well, yeah, Dr. Shepard, I got a traumatic trigger. Yeah, every time I smell this guy's cologne, it just takes me back to such and such and such. And sometimes we can be humorous about it. You know, when I hear a certain song, oh, that take me back to my day, you know, and you know, we smile and laugh about it and whatnot. But let me tell you, everybody not smiling and laughing because they're just like, ooh, that just took me back to something that I didn't want to go back to and wasn't ready to deal with it. And if you're not careful, it will cause a stimulus that will cause you to react in a way in which you were not expecting. I would submit to you that that's what happened 2 weeks ago with Will Smith. That there was a reaction that he was not ready to handle at that particular time. And before he knew it, he found himself doing something that now, as we see, he regrets, or at least he says that he regrets. So many of us have done things that we regret. It just wasn't on public TV. Bishop, I'm going to stop right there. But that was what was on my heart to continue as we're wrapping up this particular portion. I thought that graphic was important to show how so many people are struggling with these traumatic triggers.
Absolutely, Dr. Shepard. It is so important to know. I concur, and to have understanding of ourselves and to even have understanding of others, particularly those of us who are caregivers, or if you are the loved one of someone who has had a traumatic experience and is going through some of these triggers. And as you know, we are big advocates. I am for trauma-informed ministry. Theologically, trauma-informed ministry doesn't just start from the question of what did you do or what's wrong with you, but it starts from the question, what happened to you? It's very akin theologically to in Genesis 3. And many of you are already familiar with the Genesis story, but it is the story of the lapsarian or fall of man that is trying to be described. But there's a moment when it says that God came through the garden in the cool of the day looking for Adam, and he said, Adam, where are you? Adam started talking differently. And he said, well, I was naked, so I hid. And God's answer to him is, was who told you that you were naked? What relationship did you experience that has changed your language and observable behaviors? What experience did you have that is causing you to, if you will, act out this way now? The previous state being naked and not ashamed. Now this change of behavior is indicative of being exposed to something that has in effect been injurious, which is the very definition of trauma. And so bringing that kind of what happened to you, who talked to you, what experience did you have, is an important part of our approach, even in ministry, because we're often the front line or first responders to the presentation of what may be psycho-spiritual concerns. And so it's so very important to have this awareness. And so we talked about the components of trauma that we may encounter and should be mindful of in ministry. We're kind of talking about it a little bit here in this Genesis 3, the traumatic event, the traumatic experience, and the traumatic effect. The traumatic event being the thing that happened. That's objective, if you will. The experience being a person's interpretation, what they got out of what happened. That's somewhat subjective, whereas the event may be objective. And then the effect being the result or the observable behaviors or acting out. As Dr. Shepard gave a great example, someone who was perhaps exposed to some type of violence with a firearm. That's the event. The experience became one where one became fearful for his or her life. And the effect is now any loud, unexpected noise causes that person to run or duck. Now, what is important for us ministerially to understand is that there may have been more persons who were at that original event when there was an act of gun violence, if you will. But that doesn't mean that they had the same experience, which means processing it. Subsequently, they may not run when the car backfires, but they may act out in a different way. And because we act out differently, doesn't mean that we don't have some concerns. Right. And that can help us. In fact, there are sometimes casually, and you can see all of these in the context of ministry, actually, trauma responses, sometimes grouped in those categories of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And so you may say, I'm not acting out. You may not know it. So fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And so what does that look like? Well, maybe this little slight image will help you a little bit. We may be able to get up, but let's say, what do you mean when you're talking about fighting? Well, I'm not necessarily talking about physically, or taking flight. Flight, avoidant behaviors. Whenever that, if you will, I'll stay with Dr. Shepard's analogy. Whenever that car backfires, workaholic, overthinker, difficulty sitting still. Got to get it right. There can be ways of avoiding or acting out by fleeing, being in the room but not in the room. Fight. Anger, outbursts, controlling, explosive behavior, freezing, difficulty making decisions, stuck, disassociating ourselves from the moment, being in the room again, but not in the room, fawning, people pleasing, losing our identity, doing no boundaries, just trying to please our way out of the moment. And so thank you, Minister Cat. They can be any of the ways that we kind of have these responses. And so just wanted to kind of give a picture, and it's not exhaustive, but just a picture of what some of these might look like. And so that we can recognize them, because awareness is such a key, not just in ourselves, but in others. The other thing that was finally for this part, Dr. Shepard, that was significant to me about the what you presented is that that's what's going on inside of us internally. But when we talk about homeostasis and balance and all of those things, that also has a lot to deal with us as part of a system. And when we think systemically, then sometimes I'm triggered, or my homeostasis, if you will, is thrown out of balance by events that happen in my world, if you will, in my system. And so some people use the example of an air conditioning or HVAC system to describe homeostasis. Homeostasis in a thermostat. This is the time of year where people may be looking again at their thermostat and resetting the system. What that means is that if you keep your thermostat on 70, let's say you keep it on 70 degrees, that's fine. You set that thermostat at 70 degrees. Everything in your household system is going to adjust to keep the house at 70 degrees.
Right.
If you open the door and some wind comes in that cools the house, then the system is going to kick in to start making sure that heat happens. And if it gets too hot, it's going to kick off to make sure that the temperature comes down, because the HVAC system is keeping or doing everything it can to stabilize itself according to the temperature controls that you set. But what's interesting is that if somebody again opens the door and lets in some cold air or some hot air, the system gets triggered because it starts doing things in an effort to maintain balance. Because it's part of a system, and you and I are parts of a system. We are parts of family systems, work systems, organizational behaviors. And sometimes things happen in our world that are beyond our control. The image that's coming to mind is, imagine if you set the thermostat in your house and somebody else opened the door or opened a window or changed the thermostat, because you might not be the only one in that world. Other people's behaviors with whom we are in relationship can affect our homeostasis. And oftentimes, just from the ministry aspect, life changes and ministry grows and ministry evolves, and the way we do ministry changes. The message may be the same, but the method changes. And when it changes, it sometimes sends some of us through changes. And you'll start asking, who changed the thermostat? Because just when you think you got it all set, the season changes. And so some of you may be going through that right now. Seasons change in a home. Children grow up, go off to college. Children come back home. Breadwinners transition. Family loss happens. And all of these things affect the homeostasis, the stability of the organization, and subsequently my definition of my role in it. Some of you know what that means. If someone in your family becomes ill and now you take on the role of caregiver, your homeostasis has been shifted. The good news is that adjustment is possible. Coping strategies. It's all about having the healthy coping strategies. And some of you are going through those changes right now, perhaps at work, at school, in your family, in various ways. And that's why we wanted to talk about it, because again, these are realities of life and the changes of life. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus said the only thing constant is change. And so, and how we adjust to these changes of life can literally be make the difference between healthy or concerning psycho-spiritual health. And so that's why we're talking about this today. So Dr. Shepherd, that's just so I appreciate and I thank you for that analogy. That's what came to mind for me.
Yeah, this is good. And Janet, I see your question there, and I'm going to answer it. I just wanted to mention a few things that Bishop had just built upon what Bishop just stated. And, sometimes you wonder why, either for yourself or someone you're close to or whoever you may know or associate with, why they're out of balance. What keeps you out of balance? What stops you from being able to forgive? We've dealt with it before, but I'm coming back to it because I think that it's important. Unforgiveness could be the reason why you are not stable. Believe it or not, yeah, bitterness can leave you in an unstable place. Postpone obedience or disobedience. I heard a wonderful message today by Pastor Hooks, just talking about the blessing of obedience, and disobedience or postpone obedience can throw you out of whack. So Bishop was talking about some of the external stuff that may cause you to be out of balance, but then there's definitely some internal things that can cause us. And so you want to check yourself even during this time on what things may that are coming your way, because rest assured it's going to come. I do know that it's going to either come from you internally or it's going to be external. But there are things that will try, and some will even succeed, to cause you to get out of alignment, throw your equilibrium off, put you out of homeostasis. But that's why you got to make sure that your system is working well. This really leads me into answering Janet's question, because Janet asked a question about antipsychotic medications. And so before I just read all of it, you must know medications are a form of treatment that is needed when there is a disorder. That means that things are out of order. That means that things are not in place. You're not in homeostasis. So that's when medication is needed, or a serious discussion about it should happen. So she asked about antipsychotic medications and how they work, and the agonist. There we go. Antagonist. There we go. Antagonist stuff, working with the chemical parts of the brain to get people something to work with along with therapy. So what I'm not going to do is go into all the different chemical parts and how that works in the brain. I'll just tell you this. A person who is experiencing a psychotic disorder, their brain is actually in overdrive. I think sometimes we think that people's brains who are psychotic, that they're kind of dull or something's missing. Actually, it's the opposite. When you are psychotic, you have too much of a neurotransmitter called dopamine. Some people have heard of that. And that's what causes a person to have a psychotic break organically. That's you have way too much dopamine in your brain. And guess what it does? It throws you out of equilibrium. It throws you out of homeostasis. Thank you. And it can cause triggers. When you have too much dopamine in your brain, in your body, guess what happens? Your body craves for it, and it messes with the receptors. That's why it's such an important question. Thank you, Janet, because you're right on it. The dopamine or the dopaminergic receptors within your body are now jacked up. They're messed up because there's too much dopamine in there. So what happens when there's too much? The receptors are eating it up, and it causes your brain to go into disorder, and you start even seeing things, hearing things that are not there. That's some of the positive symptoms. Some of the negative symptoms, it flattens your effect. You look like you're out of it. You look like you're not here. And so many other things that can occur with a person who is psychotic. But that's why we have medicines. So the psychotic or antipsychotic medications, they're antipsychotics because they are dopaminergic. All right. I don't know why I'm stumbling on my words here. Anti-dopaminergic. And so they attack the receptors so that not too much dopamine gets on those receptors. So hopefully your body can return to some form of equilibrium, and you not be at a disorder where things such as delusions, fixed false beliefs, that's what's a psychotic disorder, believing things that are not really there, seeing things or hearing things that are not really there. There's flat affect and some other things that occur when a person is psychotic. So when we hear about psychotic disorders, they are true, they're real, and they are organic diseases. Absolutely, they are. So hopefully, Janet, I've explained to you what happens. The medicine comes in, they work on those receptors so that the body will not take up as much dopamine, which is what's causing the psychotic break. Now, there's various other neurotransmitters too, but dopamine is the major one that causes psychotic breaks. It's a very different pathway for other mental illnesses or other mental health disorders, such as depression or anxiety. That's a whole nother pathway. That's why when people never let anybody downplay a person who has mental health disorders. Be careful of that because they don't really understand. Most people don't really understand what's happening within the brain, and it really can be traumatizing. It can be traumatic on both ends. It can be traumatic for the person who's experienced the psychotic break because they don't understand what's happening within them. And it can be traumatic for the people who know the person because it's like, this is not my relative. This is not my friend. This is not my associate that I'm used to seeing. So that's when medications need to be considered when you are out of whack, as they say, or out of order. And Janet, please let me know. Type back. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, absolutely. And this is a great dialogue. And I also appreciate saying Janet Rogers, thank you, saying that things are happening at work needing to adjust. That's powerful because life again produces and encourages change and how we adjust to those things, and those changes can again be external, but they can have internal effects because they disrupt our homeostasis. Just when we think we've got it all down, they're little things. If you've ever taken a route to work that you're used to, I mean, you just know how you're going to get there. You make a left here, you make a right there, you go here, that's your way there. And then one day you go through and it says detour. Mm-hmm. Then you understand that, wow, I have become hardwired, to doing this. And it can throw you off for a minute. Are there other ways there? Yes, but this is the way you're used to. And that can happen. Life sends us through different things and causes us to take on different roles. And quite frankly, they can happen in different parts of our lives and affect each other. As we talked about last week, there were clearly some other things outside and beyond, and in addition to an extension of the behaviors that we saw 2 weeks ago, because we're seeing the effect, but there's some experiences and some events to which we were not privy, and how we choose to handle them. Again, life sends everybody through vicissitudes, through changes, through detours, and how we choose to handle them can make the difference and affect other roles sometimes. And that's where human resources and other things at work become important, to understand that people are more than just numbers and that kind of thing. And there's a lot of work being done now, even in the business world, where we're doing some study to show that being aware of these other areas that affect people, because we're one person, but we assume multiple personas, if you will. Any of us, just as one person, may be at one time a sibling and a spouse and a student and an employee, all at one time. And each one of those personas, not persons, we're one person, but each persona takes on different characteristics and we have a different homeostasis and all that, and we put it all together. But if one of them shifts, it can affect the other personas. If a death happens in my family, it can affect me as a persona, as a sibling, but it can also affect my persona as an employee. And so I have to find another kind of homeostasis, because this person that passed was one of the people I depended on to do certain roles, and now I've got to take care of them and produce here at work and shift personas, if you will, just in a 15-minute car drive. And how we adjust to that and how we recognize the need to do that and the choices that we make to do that can really, really be interrelated and affect all other areas. And so that's why this concept of balance, and we're constantly working on that balance thing, because life, as the hymn writer said, is filled with sometimes swift transitions, sometimes slow transitions, sometimes gradual transitions, but it's going to transition. And how we deal with the changes of life are so very important to our spiritual and mental wellness. And so, again, that's why this is just such an interesting conversation and helpful to me, Dr. Shepherd. Absolutely.
Yeah, and Janet, I see your comment that some personas have an entire repertoire. Yes, that is true. And I try to stay out of controversial topics. But someone asked me recently, Bishop, about my beliefs on dissociative disorders. And so back in the day, it was called multi-personality disorder. And, you've seen movies and you've seen where people have what they call alter egos. Sometimes people have 5, they say you got 5 people within them and 8 people within them. And so I try not to get into that too much. Don't want to even do that even today. Just wanted to acknowledge your comment. I just want to be careful that, we want to make sure that people don't utilize, well, I'll say like this, that people utilize certain terms and utilize certain ways of thinking about themselves in a proper and healthy way. So what am I saying? I'm careful when people tell me, well, that wasn't me, that was my alter ego. It's like, oh, okay. They don't take responsibility for what they did. Oh yeah, that was little Johnny. Wait a minute, now little Johnny, and you 50 years old? Wait, help me out. But I understand a little bit what some of them are saying. But some people can will utilize a persona, or even say they have an alter ego, or say, you know what, Shepherd, I got about 5 or 8 different people within me. And some people say, well, that's demonic. That's a demon. Well, it very well could be. I'm not going to discount that. It could be a demon possession. But there are some people who hold on to that dissociative disorder. Bishop, I don't know where you stand with that. I get a little leery at times because I do believe that you can dissociate, as you were talking about. I think that was one of the signs and symptoms of the freeze, the traumatic responses, right? Dissociation. So I do believe in dissociation, where people will literally they're there, but literally they're not there. So you see them physically, but their mind is gone. Their mind is not even where you presently sit or stand. And that's what dissociation is. But you can have a dissociative disorder where I keep saying the word literally because where people believe that, as and let's just say, for instance, as we're doing the show, then I become, let's just say, little Jonathan as I talk, and my voice changes and how I see things literally change. And you're looking at me and say, well, that's Jonathan, but that don't sound, or he's not reacting or whatever. And then there are people who actually experience this. what I have come to find out, and I'm gonna move off of it, is that many of those persons who deal with dissociation will have various different personas within them. And I know this may not be what you were referring to, Janet, but a lot of them have been abused. A lot of them have been traumatized, and that's their healthy or way. I shouldn't say healthy, but that's their way of coping with the trauma. That's their way of coping with what happened, and you have to be careful with that. A persona doesn't become something that is unhealthy of a way of managing the struggle that you are having inside of you. Yeah, I see. But Stacy, she mentioned the movie, The Three Faces of Eve. Bishop, I don't know if what you may want to say.
That's an important. And again, it's hard. It's a slippery slope, and so I totally feel you in terms of not wanting to go too far down that. I'll say this much: that's why context becomes so important. Because first of all, let's just deal with it etymologically, or in terms of the study of a word. Oftentimes a word can have different nuances in different disciplines. And so if you're listening as a psychiatrist or a mental health person, then you may hear a certain nuance to the word persona that a sociologist or a theologian does not hear. Neither of those disciplines have a corner on the market on the use of the English language.
Yeah.
That would be a bit narcissistic for any of those disciplines to think that they're the only ones who use those terms. That's why when you look up in a dictionary, it may say the definition of it in psychology, in theology, in sociology, so on and so forth, and the different nuances. And so we tend to hear with the prejudice of our particular discipline of interest. And so first, that's one. And then secondly, when we're talking about personas in theological context, we're not talking about multiple persons. That is a different definition. And actually, the very word persona and everything goes back not to a sociologist, but to a theologian by the name of Tertullian. Tertullian came up with the concept of persona in relationship of God's relationship with us. So it's not three persons, but it's three different types of relationships with appropriate boundaries, which means that as a husband, there ought to be aspects and boundaries of a relationship that I have or a spouse has that you do not have in your relationship as a child with your parent. And there are relationship boundaries, same person, as a worker that are appropriate for an employee or me as an employee, but inappropriate for me to bring my spousal self to my work environment. So it's not making it multiple personalities. It's one person with three different types of relationship boundaries.
Good.
That's an important distinction for us to make. And that's why perhaps if we ever see our children, if you walk in school, I know I have as a parent, I haven't, they all out of school, but when they were in grade school, and one day if they would have a day that I just went and looked at them in school, I would see certain characteristics and ways of interacting with their peers. I didn't even know she was like that.
Right.
Well, that's because same person, and she doesn't have a disorder. There are different characteristics of the same person that set different boundaries of relationship. She's talking with her friend. She might be like, give me that crayon. Now she's talking to me because of the way I've set boundaries. She's like, Daddy, can I color? Same person, but different personas, not necessarily making boundary issues. And that's where I don't want to go too far off the loop, but that's where we get in sometimes our misunderstanding of the concept of the Godhead. One God. It's not polytheistic, but the way he relates to us as Father is different than the way he relates to us as Son, and different than the way he relates to us as Spirit. And so it's not three gods. It's one God in different boundary relationships. And so that so that's just important that we keep those things in mind as well, because we kind of tend to go right to the negative and think that there's 4 or 5 different warring persons in me. I'm not talking about the scripture with the man who was battling legion. That's we go right to the catastrophic, if you will. But there are stages and phases and context to all of these kinds of situations. So that's why it's so important. So I'm glad we're having this discussion just for the sake of clarity, because it is a slippery slope.
Yeah, thank you, Bishop. That was awesome. That's awesome. I'm just thankful for those who are commenting. I'm recognizing our time, and so I don't think it would be smart to jump into another particular topic or go further today from my end. But I really am thankful for this series. I'm thankful because it has helped me. It's helped me to recognize, even for myself, where I am triggered, and asking the Lord, help me to be balanced. That's a prayer you should pray every day as we're wrapping up here. Lord, help me to be balanced. Balance me, Lord. Balance my mind. Lord, allow the triggers that I know that I have. And it's important. We haven't said this today. It's important to know your triggers. Not just say, well, I got this trigger, but Lord, help me so that it can be regulated. Help me so that when certain things come back up, I can respond differently. Lord, help me so that I can be the better person. Help me so that when the time comes for me to demonstrate the loving kindness and to be obedient and to be a hearer and doer of your word, Lord, help me to do just that. And I pray that even on your job, even on my job, there are certain things that I must be able to keep under control, be able to, as I supervise other physicians, as I work with other families, that I hear things, and it's amazing. You know, you hear things that people are going through, and you be like, man, you know, that sounds just like my family. Or that's just, man, or you begin to even say, ooh, you know, I didn't realize it was that bad. But I tell you, when you ask God, and should be your daily prayer, Lord, make me balanced. Help me so that I can emotionally regulate the various external and internal forces that will come my way. And if you're taking medication, I'm led to say this, and I'm done, Bishop. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Medications will help in homeostasis. It can help with you mentally, emotionally, and even physically. If you know you're supposed to be taking that blood pressure medication, let's take the medication. Make sure you're with a doctor. You understand why he or she prescribed it. If you know that you're supposed to take a medication because you're depressed and anxious, let's make sure that we're doing just those things so that we can remain in homeostasis. I know Bishop's going to take it, you know, a little further on the spiritual side, but we want to make sure our relationship with God is intact, in place. But there's nothing wrong if someone's out there. I just want to encourage you. There's nothing wrong with taking medication. That's why I'm in the field. I do prescribe medication because I've seen it work. I've seen it do some wonders in helping people remain stable. That is all. I look forward, Bishop. We are going to take a break next week. I know you're going to get parting words. Next week, we'll be celebrating Resurrection Sunday. And so we won't be with you all live next week. But Bishop, go ahead and take us out, sir.
Well, Dr. Shepherd and Spirit of My Family, it's been a blessing again, and we'll see you week after next. But I do want to close with this, and this is my closing thought today. It is, I'm going to get it just like I had it. Yes, past traumas can be triggered, but it is also true that hope can be activated. Mm-hmm. That's where I want to close off today. I don't just want to close off with the trauma triggers and that, but because both are true. Trauma can be triggered, but hope can be activated. My reference verse to close out would be a book that sounds like it's all hopeless, written by Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, as some call him, but the book of Lamentations, which by definition has in it the word lament, which means that it has some implications of sorrow. But Lamentations 3, verse 21 says, "This I recall to mind, therefore I have hope," which means positive expectation. So even in the midst of trauma triggers, when you read Lamentations, he talks about feeling like he's forgotten his prosperity and the wormwood and the gall, and my soul is sinking. And in the midst of all of those trauma triggers, he says, but there's something I can do, because I'm having these intrusive thoughts, but I can also recall something to mind that will activate my faith. And what he recalls to mind is, it's because of the Lord's mercies, yes, that we are not consumed. So the triggers of life would have consumed me before, but the Lord's mercies. And if he's done it before, he can do it again. And that's the importance of him saying, this I recall to mind, because trauma can be triggered. That's very true and should be addressed. But until you get to your therapeutic appointment, until you get to your pastoral consultation, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are of good report, think on these things, the Philippians counterpart to Lamentations, as opposed to those things. Think on these things, and the peace of God that passes all understanding will guard your heart and mind, because trauma can be triggered. But until you can get to your pastoral care appointment, or your therapeutic counseling session, they might not be able to see you until Wednesday, but you need hope today. Just know that hope can be activated even as trauma is being triggered. Wow. By the grace of God, we hope to see you next time on Spirit in Mind.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. We're on Facebook at Spirit in Mind, and we're also on Instagram at Spirit in Mind Live. Join us next time for a new episode of Spirit in Mind.